Hey guys, Zane from the Infinite Jukebox here with another album review, and today I wanted to talk about another Halloween-related album. Not necessarily an album about Halloween, I'm not talking the Monster Mash or anything like that, but an album that I personally enjoy listening to during spooky season, my favorite time of the year. Personally, I mean, it's my favorite holiday by far. I love this time of year. It's the only time of year where I get to watch The Human Centipede and not be labeled a sadist. So, it's a good time for me. I like this time of year a lot. And there's some great music to listen to during this time of year that has haunting, disturbing, grotesque vibes about it. Now, first, in this 3-album series, I talked about The Misfits' Walk Among Us, a classic horror punk album that defined one of the niches of the entire punk world. After that, I talked about Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds' Murder Ballads, a record that really redefined how murder ballads could be presented in the 20th and 21st centuries, and not only that, but cemented the Bad Seeds as one of the most legendary groups in the history of alternative music in general. But there's a thing about both those albums. I love them both. I gave them both 4.5 out of 5 stars, but neither of them necessarily blow my mind. They take concepts that have already been done by other artists or have been done better by other artists and just do them to excellent levels. I mean, yeah, the Misfits were an amazing horror punk band, probably the best, but at the same time, there are other horror punk bands that you could argue are their equals. Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, amazing alternative band, but you could also argue that there are other artists that have done murder ballads in the past that are Nick Cave particularly's equal. Really, just in general, there are artists that are equals to those that I've talked about in the past with this series. But today, I wanted to talk about an album that really just has no equals, in my opinion, or at least very few, and that is Clipping's Visions of Bodies Being Burned. Visions of Bodies Being Burned is, at the moment, still actually the latest studio album from the experimental/alternative rap project Clipping, a project that have been around for a little bit over a decade now, but really only blew up into the relative radar of a lot of music nerds throughout the course of the past 5 or 6 years, due to a series of albums that got a lot of critical praise and a lot of praise from other dorks, nerds, geeks, and the like, such as myself. I love Clipping, a lot of people I know love Clipping, and this is by far not only my favorite Clipping album, but one of my favorite albums of the past 20 years. Firstly, we have primary MC Daveed Diggs, who really just is one of the most intense performers of any genre from the past 10 or so years. I mean, frankly, he's just astonishing in terms of his actual delivery here. His lyricism is great, and that's something I will touch on in a moment, but first and foremost, his delivery is intense as there's this level of bitterness and anger behind every single line that he delivers that almost makes it feel like he's about to lose his mind at any given moment, but at the same time, it's intense, but it's also collected, concentrated, and ready to deliver each line casually to the listener while still managing to maintain this ominous feel on tracks like Check the Locks that only a rapper like Diggs could actually pull off without coming across as corny. William Hudson and Jonathan Snipes, the other 2/3 of Clipping alongside Diggs, are just brilliant producers overall as well. The beats that they drop here are just absolutely amazing. The industrial influences that they take up perfectly pair with the morbid nature of the album, both from an atmospheric and from a lyrical sense, while the harsh noise influences that they use on tracks like Make Them Dead are shockingly effective. Harsh noise, even in the harsh noise genre, is difficult to pull off properly without being obnoxious, unnecessary, grating, etc., etc. You get the point. So to have that work well in the context of a horrorcore album is genuinely impressive. Now, most importantly, due to the fact that this is a Halloween-themed episode of The Infinite Jukebox, Visions of Bodies Being Burned is a rare example of a horrorcore album that's genuinely unsettling. I mean, taking a look at horrorcore in a retrospective, it's a major niche for a reason. It's all blood and guts and gore, and that's fun, of course. I mean, blood and guts are a fun topic to talk about, let's be real. But the issue with horrorcore is that many artists took themselves very seriously or continue to take themselves seriously to this day. And that's an issue when even the big dogs of the subgenre, like Brother Hung Lynch, were sometimes a bit too cartoonish to actually feel intimidating or imposing in any manner. Clipping, on the other hand, are the exact opposite. Despite some abrasive sounds, some harsh noise influences, clipping aren't shoving abrasiveness or aggression down the listener's throat. Rather, they are casual in just how uncomfortable they are to listen to in the best way possible. Maybe it's the graphic realism of some of the lyrics. Maybe it's just the general honesty of some of the lyrics. Maybe it's these performances that, again, are cold and calculated, but at the same time raw and even brutal as far as horrorcore goes. Anyway, it just all comes together to really make a record that's difficult to describe unless you have listened to it in the past. But really, Visions of Bodies Being Burned not only is a standout in horrorcore, but a standout in hip-hop for being one of the most visceral albums of any genre that I've ever listened to. I mean, the way that clipping just like loom over the listener and manage to just be this ever omnipresent force is just shocking, honestly. It's something I could talk about all day. I absolutely adore it, and I think it's one of the most impressive performances that any group in general has delivered us throughout the 21st century so far. Every single song here is a masterpiece, or at least damn close to a masterpiece. The lyricism, brutal, vicious, violent, dark, morbid, grotesque, everything you could want from a horrorcore album, but done with a sense of, again, realism and brutality, that it feels a bit more honest and a bit more intimidating. The features of paranoia and even sort of schizophrenic-esque topics and mental health topics and violence and crime topics that are being brought up here are all things that just really kind of set this album apart and make it feel a bit more real and, for lack of a better word, a bit more legit against the entire horrorcore crowd. And look, I've got no problem with the insane clown posses of the world or anything like that, but at the same time, they do give horrorcore a bad name because it causes a lot of people who aren't into the subgenre to picture this silly, funny, sort of campy film sort of style of hip-hop. They sort of picture sleepaway camp, when in fact artists like Clipping prove that horrorcore can be the equivalent to Saw or John Carpenter's The Thing. It's not just some low-budget genre that's there for some laughs and some scares and some goofing off. I mean, sure, you can do it like that, but the best of the best know how to really make it a atmospheric and imposing sound that just does amazing things and can even strike genuine fear into the listener, whether they're trying to or not. So overall, Visions of Bodies Being Burned is not only one of my favorite hip-hop albums, not only one of my favorite albums of the past few years, but just one of my favorite albums in general. It's an intense listen, it's incredibly ominous, as I've stated before. There are some ambient passages here or there that suit the album very well and act as nice transitional pieces between waves of harsh noise and violent deliveries and industrialized beats. The dark ambient passages aren't very nice, they add a level of depth to the record that I don't think would be there otherwise, and just generally speaking, this album is wildly dynamic, and it has no right to be as incredible and insane as it actually is. I don't do this often, especially not with records from the past couple of years, but honestly, Visions of Bodies Being Burned by Clipping, I'm going to give this record 5 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that is the last album I will be reviewing for the Halloween season this year. I had a great time doing this. I got to talk about some of my favorite albums to listen to during this point of the year. I love every album that I usually mention in these series. Rarely will I ever actually talk about something that I don't like, but especially Clipping just managed to blow my mind time and time again with this record specifically. And if you haven't heard it, whether you're familiar with horrorcore or not, I highly recommend, in fact, I insist that you go listen to this. It's genuinely frightening, unnerving, and just a brilliant, mind-blowing album overall. So, with that being said, that's the end of this review. I have been Zane from the Infinite Jukebox. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.